The bitter smell of cheap whiskey filled the air. Florence Pierce slammed her fist on the table. The oil lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the saloon. "You can't be serious, Uncle Raymond." Her voice was a ragged whisper, a mix of disbelief and pure terror. Her uncle's bloodshot eyes narrowed. He was calculating her worth, not in dollars but in liquor. $17 and a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, Uncle Raymond slurred to the rough-looking men at the table. He gestured to Florence with a grimy hand. "Pretty little thing, ain't she? Good worker, too. Cooks, cleans, does it all." He grabbed her wrist when she tried to pull away. His fingers were like iron shackles digging into her skin. It was 1876, Rattlesnake Creek, Arizona, a dusty town where the law was just a suggestion and decency was rarer than a rainstorm. Florence had lived with him since her parents died of cholera. 3 long years. She was 22, and she had seen his cruelty grow worse every day. But this was a nightmare she'd never imagined. The saloon went dead silent. Even the piano man stopped playing, his fingers frozen over the yellowed keys. Florence's heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the room, desperate, searching for a single friendly face. Most men looked away. A few stared at the floor. Some just leered. No one moved to help her. Until he did. A chair scraped across the floorboards. A tall figure rose from a dark corner of the room. His face was hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but there was no mistaking the steel in his spine. "Not while I live." The words cut through the silence like a razor. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of a promise that wouldn't be broken. He stepped into the lamplight. His face was weathered, his eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were worn from the trail, but clean. A faded blue shirt, denim pants, a leather vest that had seen better days. The six-shooter at his hip wasn't for show. It was well-oiled, practical, the mark of a man who knew his life depended on it. "Who the hell are you to interfere in a man's business?" Uncle Raymond snarled, tightening his grip on Florence's wrist. She winced in pain. "Name's Thomas Redmond," the stranger said. His gaze didn't waver. "And selling your own flesh and blood for whiskey ain't business. It's lower than a snake's belly." Florence stared at him. Thomas Redmond, an answer to a prayer she hadn't even had time to whisper. Something in his eyes told her this wasn't just talk. In a town full of loudmouths and cowards, this man was different. "She ain't worth the trouble, cowboy," Raymond sneered, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Mind your own affairs." Thomas took another step forward. "I'm making it my affair." He glanced at Florence, a silent look of reassurance passing between them. "The lady doesn't seem interested in being sold like cattle. She ain't got no say in it." Raymond was on his feet now, swaying. The stench of booze rolled off him in waves. "I took her in when my sister died, fed her, clothed her. She owes me." "She owes you nothing," Thomas replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Now let go of her arm, before I make you." The threat hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Men at the other tables shifted in their seats. The bartender ducked down, probably reaching for the shotgun he kept under the bar. Uncle Raymond's face turned a deep, blotchy red. "You threatening me, boy?" "No, sir," Thomas said. "I'm promising you." Florence felt her uncle's grip go slack for just a second. It was all she needed. She twisted her arm free and stumbled back, putting space between them. Raymond lunged for her, but Thomas was quicker. He moved between them, his hand hovering over his holster, a silent, deadly warning. "The lady's made her choice," Thomas said. "Walk away now and we'll forget this ever happened." For a heart-stopping moment, Florence thought her uncle would go for the rusty revolver tucked in his belt. His fingers twitched. His face was a mask of pure rage. But he looked at Thomas's steady gaze and something inside him broke. "This ain't over," Raymond snarled, jabbing a finger at Thomas. "Not by a long shot." He spat on the floor, shot one last hateful look at Florence, and staggered to the bar. "Another whiskey!" he roared. Florence stood there frozen, her heart still trying to beat its way out of her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened, or what almost had. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas just touched the brim of his hat. "No need for thanks, Miss Florence. Florence Pierce." She rubbed her wrist, where dark bruises were already forming. Miss Pierce, he nodded. I suspect it might not be safe for you to return home tonight. The thought sent a shiver of ice down her spine. Her uncle was unpredictable. Now that he'd been humiliated, there was no telling what he'd do. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted, hating how small and vulnerable she sounded. Thomas thought for a moment. The widow Jenkins runs a respectable boarding house at the edge of town. I believe she has a spare room. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. This should cover a night or two. Florence stared at the money. Pride fought with desperation. I can't accept that. Consider it a loan then, he said, his expression softening just a little. Or payment in advance. Payment for what? I've been on the trail for 2 months driving cattle up from Texas. Haven't had a decent meal in all that time. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Word is, you're a fine cook. I'd be willing to pay fair wages for someone to cook for my outfit while we're here. Florence looked at him, suspicion creeping in. And how long might that be? A week, maybe 2. We're waiting on the trail boss to finalize some business. He glanced over at the bar, where her uncle was already lost in another drink. Should be long enough for things to cool down. She knew she should be wary of a strange man's offer. But this man, Thomas Redmond, had stood up for her when no one else would, and any path seemed better than the one that led back to her uncle. I accept your offer, Mr. Redmond, she said, taking the coins, but only as payment for cooking services. He nodded, understanding her need for dignity. The crew's camped about a half-mile outside town. 10 men total. I'll escort you to Mrs. Jenkins's place now, and come by in the morning to take you to camp. As they stepped out into the cool Arizona night, Florence felt a strange mix of terror and relief. Her whole world had been turned upside down by 5 simple words. Not while I live. Dawn broke over the desert, a blaze of pink and gold that Florence was too worried to appreciate. She hadn't slept. Her mind had been racing all night. A knock came at her door. It was Thomas Redmond, hat in hand. In the morning light, he looked younger, maybe in his early 30s, but his face was still etched with the hardness of a life spent outdoors. Morning, Miss Pierce, he said. Hope you slept well. Well enough, thank you, she lied. I've brought a horse for you. Old Betsy. She's gentle as they come. The ride to the camp was quiet. Thomas didn't ask prying questions, and Florence was grateful. As they got closer, she could smell wood smoke and coffee. A handful of men were moving around a large chuck wagon. That's where you'll be working, Thomas said, pointing to the wagon. Old Pete's been handling the cooking, but he'd be the first to admit it's not his calling. An old man with a huge white beard looked up from a pot and waved. Thank the Lord, Auntie hollered. Another day of my cooking, and the boys were going to mutiny. Florence couldn't help but smile. I hope I can live up to expectations. Long as you can make something besides beans and salt pork, you'll be a queen to us, Pete said. The work was hard but honest. She cooked a midday meal, and the Cowboys, a rough but decent bunch, treated her with a respect she hadn't known in years. They gathered for the stew and biscuits she'd made, and Thomas made the introductions. Boys, this is Miss Florence Pierce. She'll be handling the cooking. I expect you to treat her with the same respect you'd show your own mothers or sisters. There was a chorus of, yes, sir, and welcome, Miss Pierce. A young red-headed cowboy named Riley took a bite of a biscuit. Good Lord, woman, these are like clouds. If angels eat bread, this is what it tastes like. Florence felt a warmth spread through her cheeks. They're just biscuits. Don't let her modesty fool you. A familiar, hateful voice cut through the air. Florence froze. Her blood turned to ice. Uncle Raymond was sitting on a horse at the edge of the camp. He looked sober now, which made him infinitely more dangerous. 2 other men from the saloon were with him. In a flash, Thomas was on his feet, standing between Florence and her uncle. The other cowboys stood up too, their hands drifting towards their guns. You're not welcome here, Pierce, Thomas said, his voice flat and even. Raymond just smiled, a cold, ugly thing. Now is that any way to greet family? I've just come to check on my dear niece. His eyes landed on Florence. Quite the schemer, aren't you? Found yourself a protector quick enough. Leave, Raymond, Florence said. surprised at the strength in her own voice. I'm not going back with you. Such ingratitude, he sneered. After all I've done for you. The lady made her choice, Thomas said, taking a step forward. I suggest you respect it. Raymond's eyes narrowed. And if I don't, then you'll have more than just me to deal with. The other cowboys had formed a silent wall behind Thomas. Their faces were hard. Their message was clear. Raymond looked at the 10 men standing against him. He was a bully, not a fool. He knew the odds. He spat on the ground. This territory is getting too crowded for my taste anyway. I'm heading to California. He looked at Florence one last time. You were always more trouble than you were worth. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, his 2 cronies following close behind. Florence watched them go, a cloud of dust on the horizon. It felt too easy, too simple. You think he's really leaving? She asked Thomas quietly. He shook his head. Men like that rarely give up so easily. But he won't try anything with all of us here. He didn't have to say the rest. Florence knew what he was thinking. When the cattle drive moved on, she'd be alone again, vulnerable. We'll figure something out, he said. For now, you're safe here. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Hard work, good food, and the respectful company of the cowboys. But Thomas kept his distance. He was always polite, always formal. He called her Miss Pierce while the other men had started calling her Florence. He built an invisible wall between them, and she didn't understand why. On the 5th day, he came to her while she was washing dishes. He was turning his hat over and over in his hands, a nervous habit she'd noticed. I've been into town today, he said. There's word that your uncle has indeed left the territory. The stagecoach driver confirmed they bought tickets to Yuma. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by a familiar dread. Even if he is gone, she said, I still have nowhere to go once your crew moves on. Thomas nodded, his face serious. That's what I wanted to discuss. The trail boss has finalized his deals. We'll be moving out day after tomorrow. The words hit her like a punch. Just 2 more days, then back to uncertainty. I see, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. There's another option, he said quickly. If you'd consider it, the JT Ranch. That's where we're delivering the herd. It's a big operation, about 100 miles north of here. The owner, Mr. Thornton, is looking for a cook for the ranch house. The pay is good and you'd have your own quarters. Hope, bright and sharp, pierced through her fear. And you think he would hire me? Without references? I'd vouch for you, he said. He hesitated. It would mean traveling with us for another week or so. Yes, she said, before he could take the offer back. Yes, I accept. Thank you. A small, rare smile touched his face. Good, that's good. As he walked away, Florence felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A future. The drive north was harder than she'd expected. The chuck wagon bounced and jolted over the rough terrain, turning cooking into a balancing act. Old Pete taught her the ways of the trail, and she was a quick learner. Thomas, however, was a ghost. He spent his days with the cattle, only speaking to her at mealtimes. Polite, distant, still calling her Miss Pierce. It started to feel like a rejection, a deliberate slight, but she couldn't figure out what she had done. On the 6th night, a vicious storm rolled in. Rain came down in sheets, turning the camp into a sea of mud. The cattle were restless. Florence could hear the cowboys shouting over the wind, trying to keep the herd from stampeding. She was struggling to keep the cooking fire lit under a canvas tarp when Thomas appeared out of the darkness, soaked to the bone. Storm's getting worse, he yelled. We need to secure the wagon better. They worked together, fighting the wind and the rain. A powerful gust tore the tarp from her hands and she slipped in the mud. Thomas lunged, catching both the tarp and her. For a second, they were pressed together. His arm was tight around her waist, her hands clutching his shoulders. Through the cold, wet clothes, she could feel the solid warmth of him. Careful, he murmured, his voice close to her ear. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. Raindrops clung to his eyelashes. In his eyes, she saw something shift, a flicker of emotion, quickly hidden away. Thank you, she said, not pulling away, for catching me. He held her gaze for a heartbeat too long. Then he let her go and stepped back. We should finish securing the wagon, he said, his voice back to its usual formal tone. The moment was gone. It left her confused, breathless, and with a strange ache in her chest. Later, he helped her climb into the dry space beneath the wagon. "Try to get some rest," he said. "I'll be with the herd." "You're not taking shelter?" she asked, alarmed. A flash of lightning lit up his tired smile. "Someone has to make sure those cattle don't decide to visit New Mexico tonight." He touched the brim of his hat and disappeared back into the storm. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain, thinking about the man who held her for a moment and then walked away. By morning, the storm had passed. Thomas looked like he hadn't slept a wink. "Bad night?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "I've had worse," he said. He drained the cup. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Pierce." There it was again, that wall between them. Whatever she had seen in his eyes during the storm, it was gone now. A few days later, they reached the JT Ranch. It was a huge, prosperous operation nestled in a valley. The owner, a gray-haired man named James Thornton, rode out to meet them. "Thomas tells me you're looking for a position as a cook," Mr. Thornton said, tipping his hat. "My last one ran off with a traveling salesman. Been eating my foreman's cooking ever since. It's enough to make a man consider becoming a vegetarian." Florence smiled. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Thornton." "Can you make a decent apple pie?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. The question caught her by surprise. "Yes, sir. My mother's recipe won blue ribbons back in Missouri." Thornton's face broke into a huge grin. "Then you're hired. My late wife made the best apple pie west of the Mississippi. Haven't had a proper one in 5 years." It was that simple. A new life, a safe place, respectable work. She barely had time to say goodbye to the Cowboys. Pete gave her a hug. The others wished her well, but Thomas was nowhere to be found. Later that evening, after she'd settled into her new room, there was a knock on the door. It was Thomas, hat in hand. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said. "We'll be moving on at first light." "So soon?" The thought was a sharp pang of disappointment. "You'll do well here," he said. "Thornton's a fair man." "Thanks to you," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay you for everything." He shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, her voice firm. "They wouldn't have. No one else stood up for me. Just you." An awkward silence fell between them. She wanted to ask him why he'd been so distant. She wanted to ask if the moment in the rain had meant anything to him, but the words wouldn't come. "Will you, do you pass through this way often?" she asked instead. Something flickered in his eyes. "Regret? Hard to say," he answered. "The cattle business takes me where it will." It wasn't the answer she wanted. He extended his hand. "Goodbye, Miss Pierce." She took it, feeling the rough calluses of his palm against hers. "Goodbye, Mr. Redmond." He released her hand, hesitated for a split second, then turned and walked away. Florence closed the door and leaned against it, a hollow feeling spreading through her. She was safe. She had a future. But as she listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, she felt like she was losing the most important thing she'd ever found. Life at the JT Ranch was good. Mr. Thornton was a kind employer, the work was steady, and for the first time in years, Florence felt safe. Weeks turned into months. Summer faded into a crisp autumn, but a quiet emptiness lingered. She thought of Thomas Redmond often, wondering where he was, if he ever thought of her. It was foolish, she knew. Their time together was so brief, and he'd never given her any reason to think he saw her as more than a woman he'd helped out of a bad situation. Still, every time a rider appeared on the horizon, her heart would leap with a hope that always ended in disappointment. In October, Mr. Thornton announced a harvest celebration for the whole community. Florence threw herself into the preparations, planning a huge feast. "You'd think you were preparing for your own wedding," the housekeeper Martha teased. Florence blushed. "I just want it to be special." Hmm, Martha said, a knowing smile on her face. "And it has nothing to do with the fact that Mr. Thornton invited the /R outfit to join us. The same outfit that a certain Mr. Redmond rides with." Florence nearly dropped the rolling pin. "Are they coming?" Martha's smile widened. "Sent word yesterday. They'll be here." She patted Florence's hand. "You might want to wear that blue dress we altered. Brings out your eyes something wonderful." The day of the party, Florence's hands trembled as she dressed. It had been nearly 4 months. Would he even remember her? The barn was filled with music and laughter. She moved through the crowd, her eyes scanning for him. And then she saw him. He was standing by the entrance talking to Mr. Thornton. He looked the same, maybe a little leaner. As if he felt her watching, he looked up. His eyes found hers across the crowded room. He excused himself from Mr. Thornton and started walking towards her. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Miss Pierce," he said, removing his hat. "You're looking well. As are you, Mr. Redmond." A faint smile touched his lips. "Mr. Thornton tells me your apple pies have become legendary in these parts." "Hardly legendary," she said, "but they seem to please." The musicians started playing a waltz. Thomas cleared his throat. "Would you care to dance, Miss Pierce?" "I'd like that," she said, surprised her voice didn't shake. He led her to the dance floor. His hand was warm on her waist. He was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. They moved together in a perfect, silent harmony. "I've thought about you," he said quietly, his voice so low only she could hear. "Often." The words sent a flood of warmth through her. "Have you?" He nodded. The music ended, but he didn't let her go. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "There are things I'd like to say that aren't suited for a crowded dance floor." He led her outside into the cool night air, to a quiet bench beneath an old apple tree. "I've never properly thanked you," she began. "What you did that night, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "It wasn't brave," he said softly. "It was necessary. Some things a man can't just stand by and watch." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I had a sister once, younger than me. Her husband, he was a cruel man. By the time I found out how bad things were, it was too late." The pain in his voice was a raw, open wound. "When I saw your uncle treating you that way," he continued, "I couldn't stand by. Not again." Understanding dawned on her. "So that's why you helped me? Because of your sister?" "At first, yes," he admitted. He turned to look at her, his eyes full of an emotion she couldn't name. "Then it became about you." He reached out and took her hand. His touch sent a jolt through her. "I kept my distance during the drive because I didn't want you to think I expected anything in return. I wanted you to be free to choose your own path, without feeling like you owed me anything." She looked down at their joined hands, his rough, calloused palm against hers. "And now?" she whispered. "Now I'm tired of keeping my distance," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Florence." It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sounded like music. "If you'll permit me, I'd like to call on you properly, to get to know you better." Joy, bright and overwhelming, bubbled up inside her. "I'd like that very much, Thomas." His smile transformed his face, erasing the years of hardship and loneliness. He stood, pulling her to her feet. She gathered her courage, stood on her toes, and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered. "Not just for what you did then, but for coming back now." He reached up and touched the spot where her lips had been, his expression one of pure wonder. Then, with a gentleness that defied his strength, he drew her close and kissed her. It was brief, but it was full of a promise that stole her breath away. "I'll always come back to you, Florence," he murmured against her hair, "as long as you want me to." As they walked back toward the light and the music, she knew her life had just changed forever. Again. This time not by chance, but by choice. Their choice. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Florence's life. Thomas courted her properly, riding out to the JT Ranch whenever he could. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their past and dreams for their future. But as winter set in, the snows made travel difficult, and his visits grew less frequent. They wrote letters, short, simple notes that she read over and over again until she knew them by heart. Then in late January, the news came. A ranch hand just back from town reported that he'd seen her Uncle Raymond. He'd been asking questions, looking for his niece. He'd said, unfinished business. The old fear, the one she thought she'd buried forever, came rushing back. Mr. Thornton posted guards around the main house. "Miss Pierce doesn't go anywhere alone," he ordered. But Florence felt like a prisoner again. More than anything, she wished Thomas was there. A week later, she was in the kitchen when she heard a horse gallop into the yard. She looked out the window and saw him. Thomas. She ran outside, not even stopping to take off her apron. He swung down from his horse, his face weary from a hard ride. "Florence," he said. He already knew. "Word travels fast," he said, following her inside. "I came as soon as I could." For 3 days, the ranch was on high alert. Thomas stayed close, a silent, comforting presence. There was no sign of Raymond. The tension was unbearable. On the fourth day, Florence went to gather eggs from the hen house. She heard a horse. She thought it was one of the guards. She looked up, and her heart stopped. It was him, Uncle Raymond. He was 10 yards away, a rifle resting across his saddle. "Well, well," he drawled. "If it ain't my darling niece playing at being a respectable woman." "What do you want, Uncle Raymond?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Just a family reunion." His smile was pure poison. "And I want that meddling cowboy to suffer for interfering." Her eyes darted towards the main house. Thomas was out checking the fences. Mr. Thornton was in town. She was alone. "Looking for help?" Raymond mocked, dismounting. "My boys are keeping your cowhands busy on the other side of the property. A little diversion." It was a trap. He advanced on her, the rifle aimed at her chest. "I want what's owed me." Her back hit the wall of the hen house. There was nowhere to run. He reached for her arm. She swung the egg basket with all her might, smashing it into his face. He howled in rage, blinded for a second. She bolted. She almost made it to the corner of the house when she heard the click of the rifle hammer. "One more step and I'll shoot you in the back," he snarled. She froze. Slowly, she turned to face him. A distant shout distracted him for a split second. She lunged. She grabbed the barrel of the rifle, pushing it upward as he fired. The shot exploded into the sky. They wrestled for the gun, her desperation a match for his drunken strength. They staggered across the yard. Her foot caught on a root, and they both went down. He wrenched the rifle free and scrambled to his feet, leveling it at her as she lay on the ground. "Enough games," he panted, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice was steady, deadly calm. "Thomas." He was standing 15 yards away, his revolver aimed straight at Raymond's heart. "Drop the rifle, Pierce," Thomas commanded. "Now." Raymond hesitated, his eyes darting between Florence and Thomas. "You don't have the guts," he sneered. "Try me," Thomas replied, his voice like ice. Raymond believed him. He dropped the rifle. "Your boys have been rounded up," Thomas said. "Now you have a choice. Leave this territory and never come back, or spend the next 10 years in prison for attempted murder." Florence got to her feet, her whole body trembling. She looked at her uncle, this bitter, broken man who had haunted her for so long, and she wasn't afraid anymore. "I'm not your responsibility anymore," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If you ever come near me again, I will not hesitate to defend myself." Raymond stared at her, shocked. This wasn't the timid girl he remembered. With a final hateful glare, he turned, got on his horse, and rode away for the last time. The moment he was gone, Thomas holstered his gun and rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" The strength that had held her up suddenly vanished. She started to shake, tears streaming down her face. He pulled her into his arms. "Shh, it's over now. He's gone." She clung to him, sobbing out all the fear and terror. He just held her, stroking her hair, until the tears finally stopped. She looked up at him. His face was etched with a powerful emotion that stole her breath. "I nearly lost you," he said, his voice hoarse. "When I heard that shot." She reached up and touched his face. "But you didn't. You saved me." Again. He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just helped at the end." He took her hands in his. "Florence," he began, his voice hesitant. "I had planned to do this differently, but today reminded me that life doesn't always give us perfect moments. I love you. I think I have since that first night in the saloon." Her heart soared. "I've spent my life moving from place to place, never feeling like I belonged. But with you, I've found my home." He took a deep breath. "Florence Pierce, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy, pure and overwhelming, washed away all the darkness. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Redmond. He kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss, right there in the middle of the ranch yard, with the chickens pecking at their feet. It wasn't the perfect moment he had planned. It was better. It was real. They were married the following spring, in the ranch garden under an arch of wildflowers. Thomas took a job as foreman of the JT, and they moved into a small house on the property. The ghosts of the past were finally gone, replaced by the promise of a future they would build together. 5 years later, Florence stood on the porch of that same house, now a little bigger. She watched Thomas teaching their 4-year-old son, James, how to ride a pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, clung to her skirts. Life was good. It was simple. It was everything she had never dared to dream of. Thomas looked up and caught her eye, his face breaking into that familiar, beloved smile. Even after all this time, it still made her heart skip a beat. The man who had walked out of the shadows and saved her was now the center of her world. He lifted James onto his shoulders and walked toward the house. "Were you watching?" he asked, leaning in to kiss her. "The boy's a natural." "Just like his father," she replied, smiling. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite." "Apple pie?" He grinned. "Always." As they went inside, the sound of their children's laughter filling the warm evening air, Florence felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been hard, terrifying at times, but it had led her here. To this man, to this family, to this home. "Not while I live," Thomas had promised her all those years ago. And he had kept that promise every single day, turning 5 words spoken in a dusty saloon into a lifetime of love. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of courage and justice from the Old West, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button.